Arizona Territory, 1887. Dawn came crawling slow over Silverton, brushing the canyon ridges in red fire and dust. The town was barely awake, the wind whispering down from the hills like something old and restless. It caught at the shutters of the Silver Spur Saloon, made them rattle like teeth. The air smelled of coal smoke and whiskey, of horses unwashed and men unshaven. Tin roofs gleamed faintly as the first sun climbed up, and the long street shimmered with the promise of another hard day. Through that rising heat came a man the town barely noticed anymore, Amos Braddock. His beard was gray as the mountain ash, his limp steady as a pendulum, each step measured, deliberate. He wore a faded duster and a wide-brimmed hat sun-cracked along its edges. On his hip hung a revolver so rusted the grip looked ready to flake away. It hadn't fired in 10 years. Some said it couldn't anymore. Amos never argued. He only kept walking, the way a man does who's outlived his pride. The general store opened its door with a creak, and the smell of grain and coffee drifted out. Amos stepped inside, tipping his hat to Mrs. Klein behind the counter. She gave him a tight smile, pity more than welcome. "Mornin', miss," she said softly. "You're early." He nodded, setting down his coin pouch. "Sun's up. Might as well be me too." Outside, laughter echoed from the saloon across the street, young cowhands from the nearby spreads, loud with drink though the day had barely begun. They hollered and cursed and bragged of horses, of women, of guns. Amos's eyes shifted that way for half a second, then returned to the sack of coffee beans he'd come for. "Best you stay out of their way," Mrs. Klein murmured, wrapping his goods in brown paper. "Boy's been spoilin' for sport since last night." "Sport ends when the whiskey does," Amos said quietly. He tucked the package under his arm and stepped back into the glaring light. Silverton had been born from silver and stubbornness. The mines to the north had once kept its pockets fat and its nights alive, but that was years ago. Now the streets were tired, the boards dry, and the hearts mean. Men with nothing left but guns found reason enough to keep talking with them. The wind picked up dust and memory alike, and Amos felt both sting his eyes as he crossed toward the livery. He'd almost reached it when a voice called from the saloon porch. "Hey, looky there. Ain't that Amos Braddock, the ghost of Dry Creek?" The laughter that followed was sharp, hungry. Amos stopped. His shadow stretched long in the dirt. He didn't turn. Another voice chimed in. "That gun of yours even work, old man? Or sit like you, all rust and no thunder?" The laughter rolled louder. A bottle smashed somewhere inside. Amos looked down at his side. The Colt .45 hung there quiet, the metal dulled from years of disuse, a spider's thread caught between hammer and sight. He exhaled slow, the kind of breath that seemed to come from somewhere far deeper than lungs. Then he turned, limping toward the saloon. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and sweat. Light spilled through dusty windows, catching the gold edges of whiskey bottles lined like soldiers behind the bar. Four cowhands lounged near a poker table, boots up, grins wide. One of them, a sandy-haired kid barely out of boyhood, pointed his drink at Amos. "You used to be somebody, didn't ya?" Amos set his bundle on the counter and took his time answering. "I used to be a lot of things. None worth talking about." The boy laughed, elbowing his friend. "Hear that, boys? Old man's shy. Maybe that gun's shy too. Might not even remember how to bark." Amos met his eyes, steady as dusk. "It's done its killing," he said softly. "I pray it sleeps." The room went quieter than anyone expected. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the tick of the ceiling fan's slow rotation. Then laughter erupted again, louder, sharper, meant to cover something uneasy. The boy raised his glass in mock salute. "Well, let it sleep, old-timer. World's got plenty of men still awake." Amos tipped his hat and turned to leave. The floorboards groaned under his boots. He didn't look back as he stepped into the light, though behind him the laughter followed like the tail of a whip. He didn't see Sheriff Calloway until he reached the hitching post. The man was leaning against it, thumbs hooked in his belt, eyes narrow under the brim of a clean badge-polished hat. He was younger than Amos by maybe 15 years but looked older in spirit. "You shouldn't let 'em bait you, Amos," he said. "They don't know better." Amos paused beside his horse, smoothing the animal's neck. "Not my place to teach him," he murmured. Calloway's voice lowered. "I wish that were true. But there's worse comin' than loud mouths. Brunner boys rode in this morning. You remember Clay Brunner?" Amos's hand stilled on the horse's mane. "Vaguely. Me nice. Quick draw. Killed a man in Prescott." "That's him," the sheriff said grimly. "Got his brother Jesse and a couple more with him. They been drinking heavy since sunrise. Say they're here for business, but trouble's what they sell best." Amos nodded slowly. "Then you best keep your badge polished." "I'll try," Calloway said, though his tone carried no conviction. "But they're the kind that don't much care for law. Thought maybe you'd want to keep that in mind. Maybe stay home a spell." "I been stayin' home 10 years, Joe." Amos looked down the street, toward where the saloon doors swung and laughter still spilled out. "Ain't done much good." The sheriff's eyes softened. "That ain't on you, Amos. What happened to Eli? That was fate's cruelty, not yours." Amos tightened the cinch on his saddle. The name hung heavy between them. Eli. The boy with his mother's eyes and his father's pride. 10 years gone and still fresh in memory. A street duel, an outlaw with a quick hand and quicker smile, the shot that took everything worth keeping. Amos had buried his gun with his heart that day. He mounted up without another word and rode toward the ridge outside town. The wind met him there, carrying with it the dry scent of mesquite and iron. Below, Silverton spread small and stubborn in the red dirt. He remembered when it had been a place of laughter, his wife singing on the porch, Eli chasing a dog through the dust. Now it was ghosts and whiskey and the clink of poker chips in the night. He sat there until the sun slid low and the shadows lengthened across the valley. When he turned back toward town, lanterns were coming alive one by one, small fires in a sea of emptiness. The air cooled and somewhere a coyote called. As dusk deepened, a new sound joined the wind, the heavy rumble of hooves. For riders came over the rise from the east, dust pluming behind them. The Brunner gang. Even from a distance Amos could feel the wrongness they carried, like wolves crossing a pasture. He watched them descend into Silverton, their laughter already rising above the sound of their horses. By the time Amos rode back into town, the streets were half empty. Doors shut fast, curtains drawn. The saloon glowed bright as a forge, voices spilling out, wild, reckless, mean. Sheriff Calloway stood on the boardwalk outside, hand resting near his gun, jaw tight. Amos reined in beside him. "They startin' already?" "Started the minute they hit the ground," Calloway said. "Shot a sign off the blacksmith's door, spooked a team near the feed store. Folks too scared to blink." Clay Brunner rode into Silverton like a man who owned the dust he stirred. His horse was black as spilled ink, its eyes wild, its hooves striking sparks from the stones. He sat tall in the saddle, hat low over a face carved from arrogance. The wind tugged at his long coat, and the townsfolk watched from windows, their whispers vanishing when he turned his head. Fear followed him like a shadow. His younger brother, Jesse, rode just behind, smaller, quicker, meaner, with a mouth that couldn't stay shut and hands that never stopped twitching near his holster. 2 more trailed them, their laughter sharp and cold as nails. The Brunner gang had arrived, and Silverton would remember it. By midday the saloon belonged to them. Clay stood at the bar, whiskey glass in hand, talking big and loud, the kind of talk that made weak men laugh along just to stay breathing. Jesse strutted between tables, flicking cards from a stolen deck, bragging how they'd made Dodge City kneel, and how Silverton would do the same. Every few minutes, Clay's boothiel would tap the floor, a warning rhythm, a signal that the laughter should never die down. When Amos Braddock stepped through the doors again, it was like the air itself paused. He moved slow, the limp more pronounced, his coat brushing the floor. The laughter started soft this time, cautious, until Jesse spotted him. "Well, if it ain't the ghost come to fetch his rust." Jesse sneered. "Look, boys, the relic's back to clean his coffin piece." Amos said nothing. He crossed the room with a quiet dignity that made the younger men uneasy. His revolver, mud-streaked and dull, hung heavy at his side. He knelt, took out his kerchief, and began to wipe the dirt away in silence. The saloon burst into laughter again. Ain't that something? He's polishing his grave marker, Jesse jeered. Clay turned from the bar, swirling his drink. Old man, you best learn respect. When my brother talks, you answer. Amos didn't look up. I don't talk to boys, he said softly. The room went still. Then Clay smiled, a slow, dangerous thing. That's so. The next sound was deafening. Clay's revolver barked twice, bullets hitting the floorboards near Amos's boots. Splinters leapt. Amos didn't flinch. Dance, old man, Clay said. Let's see if them bones remember music. A murmur went through the room, a sick thrill mixed with shame. Amos stood slowly, brushed off his coat, and looked Clay in the eyes. There was no fear in him, only a sadness that cut deeper than any insult. I done my dancing, son, he said. Didn't much care for the tune. He turned and walked out, leaving behind silence thick enough to choke on. Clay watched him go, a flicker of doubt behind his grin, but Jesse broke it with another laugh. He's dust, he said. Dust don't bite. Outside, Sheriff Calloway stood on the boardwalk, hands on his belt. He'd heard the shots. You tryin' to start a war, Clay? He asked, voice tight. Clay swaggered out, whiskey bottle dangling from his hand. Just teachin' respect, Sheriff. You oughta thank me. I'll thank you to holster that iron before I forget my manners, Calloway said. His eyes flicked toward the townsfolk peeking from doorways. Ain't no need for blood here. Clay smirked. Ain't no need for law neither, far as I can tell. Town's soft. Folks do what they're told. He stepped closer, close enough for the sheriff to smell the liquor on his breath. You keep your badge shiny, Joe. Makes it easier to see who's next. Calloway held his stare until the gang sauntered back inside. Only then did he exhale, long and weary. He found Amos sitting on the hitching rail across the street, eyes lowered, fingers idly tracing the revolver's grip. You could have drawn on him, Calloway said quietly. Nobody would have blamed you. Amos shook his head. That's the problem, Joe. Once you start, nobody ever stops. Town's slippin' again, the sheriff muttered. Feels like the old days, fear in the water, pride in the dust. They've been buying up property since yesterday. Saloon, freight office, even the damn livery. Might own half of Silverton come week's end. Fear's cheaper than land, Amos said. Always was. A scream cut through the evening then. Sharp, human, close. Both men turned. Across the street, the Brunner boys were outside the tailor's shop, one of them dragging the tailor's daughter by her wrist. She was young, barely 20, dress torn, tears streaking through the dust on her face. Jessie laughed, holding her hat high in mock courtesy. Ain't no harm, sweetheart. Just a skin, if the lady dances. Her father stumbled out, begging, hands shaking. Clay watched from his horse, saying nothing, the sun glinting off his gun belt. The sheriff started forward, but Amos caught his arm. You'll die for nothin', Joe. And she'll live with nothin', Calloway snapped, yanking free. He strode into the street, his voice ringing. Let her go. Jessie turned, smirking. You gonna make me lawman? Don't make me repeat myself. Clay's smile spread slow as a knife unsheathed. Brother, let her be. Sheriff's a man of peace. Ain't that right, Joe? The girl was released with a shove. She ran to her father, sobbing. The sheriff's hand hovered near his holster, but Clay just tipped his hat. No need for trouble, friend. We was just playin'. Some games ain't worth playin', Calloway said. Depends who's watchin', Clay replied, then spurred his horse, riding off toward the outskirts. The gang followed, dust rising behind them like a storm. Amos stood frozen on the boardwalk. His hand still gripped his cane, white-knuckled. Every muscle in his body screamed to move, to act, but the weight of years held him still. The guilt burned deeper than pride. That night, thunder rolled over the hills. Rain came down sudden and fierce, drumming on rooftops, washing the streets clean for a moment. Amos sat by his window, watching the lightning dance across the sky. The storm carried him back 10 years, to another night when thunder had sounded like gunfire. He saw it as clear as if it were now, his boy Eli standing in the middle of Main Street, coat flapping, rain in his hair. The outlaw faced him 10 paces away, laughing. Amos had shouted, "Don't!" but his voice was lost in the wind. Then came the flash, the roar, the single moment that split his life in two. When Amos reached him, Eli's eyes were open to the sky, unblinking. The storm had taken everything that mattered and left only silence. Amos closed his eyes against the memory, but it clung to him like the smell of rain-soaked earth. He thought of Clay's grin, Jesse's laughter, the girl's tears. The pattern was the same, cruelty breeding in a town too scared to fight. 2 days later, word came from the North Road. A rancher named Harlan Webb had been found dead in the dust, shot through the chest. The Brunner gang claimed self-defense, said he'd pulled first. But no one believed them. The sheriff rode out to see the body, found the man's gun still in its holster. Silverton went quiet after that. Doors barred early, lamps blown out by dusk. Folks crossed streets rather than meet the gang's gaze. In the saloon, Clay held court, bragging how he'd tamed the town. Coins clinked, laughter rang false. From his cabin at the edge of town, Amos watched it all. Nights, he sat before the fireplace, the revolver laid out on the table. The metal caught the flicker of flame, gleaming in places where rust had once dulled it. His reflection wavered across its barrel, a tired man, a haunted man. By the end of that summer, Silverton had forgotten how to breathe. The streets emptied long before sunset now, as if the sun itself hurried to leave. Shutters closed with the scrape of fear, the clang of shop doors echoed like nails driven into wood coffins. The church bell, once the heart of every evening, stayed silent after dark. Even the dogs had stopped barking. When wind blew through town, it carried nothing but dust and unease, whispering against the windows like ghosts asking to be let in. Amos Braddock walked those streets alone. He saw the life drain from them little by little, the barber's pole no longer turning, the blacksmith's forge cold, the saloon lights glowing longer than they should. Fear was the new currency, and everyone was paying in silence. He said nothing either. Words had weight in Silverton now, and too many spoken wrong could get you buried quick. One morning he rode out past the old cottonwood grove, where the land sloped toward the cemetery hill. The air smelled of sage and dry clay, and a thin mist rose from the creek beyond. He dismounted slowly, his knees stiff from the years, and walked through the leaning crosses until he found the one that mattered most. The letters were faint now, eaten by wind and time. Asterisk Eli Braddock. 1866-1877. Asterisk beneath it lay another stone, smaller, rounder, Clara Braddock, his wife. The ache never dulled. He knelt, brushing sand from the names. From his coat pocket he took a single bullet, polished silver catching the sun. He placed it gently atop the grave. "One last time," he murmured, his voice breaking in the wind. "Then I'll join you." The town below looked small from up there, as though already fading from history. Smoke rose from the saloon chimney, a gray wound against the sky. Somewhere beyond that haze, the Brunner gang laughed over stolen whiskey, and Amos felt the weight of it pressing on his chest. He didn't hear the boy approach until the horse snorted behind him. Tom Ellison was small, wiry, with hair the color of red clay and eyes too old for 14. He worked at the livery, orphaned when fever swept through 3 winters ago. "Mr. Braddock?" he said softly, holding his hat in both hands. "Didn't mean to follow. Sheriff said you come up here sometimes." Amos turned, managing a faint smile. "You did right not to speak loud. Dead folks don't like chatter." Tom shifted uneasily. "I just wanted to ask something. The fellas at the stable say you fought at Mesilla. That true?" Amos chuckled low, a sound that hurt coming out. "I was there, sure enough. Fought on both sides before I knew which was which." "What was it like?" the boy asked, eyes wide. Amos looked out across the horizon. The light trembled on the ridges, and far away, a hawk circled lazy in the air. "It was loud," he said finally. "Men hollerin', horses screamin', sky full of smoke. You fire till the noise makes sense, and when it's quiet again, you start countin' the wrong things. I didn't win nothin' worth rememberin'. I just lived long enough to regret it." Tom lowered his gaze. "You ever gonna use that gun again?" Amos didn't answer right away. He drew a slow breath, the kind you take before confessin' something to God. A gun's a heavy thing, boy. Not for its iron. For what it takes out of a man. Every time you draw, you lose something that don't come back. Later that week, as the sun dropped behind the mesas, Tom stopped by Amos's cabin with a bucket of water and a look of curiosity that wouldn't quit. Inside, Amos sat at the table, the revolver laid open like a wound. He was cleaning it piece by piece, a lantern casting gold light across his weathered hands. The sound of oiling metal filled the room, slow, rhythmic, like breathing after a long run. "You're fixin' it," Tom said quietly. Amos nodded, eyes never leaving the gun. "Just keepin' it honest. Metal rusts same as men." The boy stepped closer. "Teach me?" Amos hesitated, then handed him the cleaning rag. "You don't need to learn how to shoot, Tom. You need to learn what it means. This here ain't a toy, nor a tool. It's a promise. And once it's made, there's no taking it back." Tom watched, fascinated, as Amos reassembled the revolver. "So what did you promise it?" "That I'd never draw it again," Amos said softly. The words lingered, heavy as smoke. Outside, thunder grumbled over the hills. While Amos taught the boy caution, the Brunner gang taught the town obedience. Their boots stomped through the streets like a drumbeat of control. They drank on credit, took what they wanted, and laughed when no one stopped them. The sheriff was the last line, and even he was running out of strength. When news came that the gang meant to rob the mine's payroll wagon, the same wagon that kept half the town alive, Sheriff Calloway rode out to meet them. He went alone, because no one else dared follow. The fight wasn't fair, it never was. By sunset, the sheriff's horse came back without him, saddle soaked in blood. They found him near the ridge, half conscious, ribs broken, jaw bruised purple. He'd stood his ground, but 4 guns against 1 made short work of courage. When Amos helped carry him inside the doctor's office, Calloway's hand caught his sleeve. "They own it all now," the sheriff rasped. "The mine, the freight road, the saloon. I tried to talk. They beat me for talkin'." "Rest," Amos said gently. "You done what you could." Calloway shook his head weakly. "Not enough. Not near enough. This town needs more than law. Needs someone the devil fears." That night the church filled for the first time in weeks. Fear had driven people inside. Men, women, even children. Rain pattered on the roof, and the preacher's voice trembled but strong. "The good book tells us there's a time for peace," he said, "but also a time for the sword. Even the meek must sometimes bear it, else evil reigns without contest." Amos sat in the back pew, hat in his lap. The lantern light played across his face, deepening the lines carved there by regret. The preacher's words settled into him like stones dropped in water. Even the meek must sometimes bear the sword. Afterward, as folks shuffled out in silence, Amos lingered behind. The rain had stopped. Outside, a wanted poster flapped against the church door, wet and curling at the edges. Someone had nailed it there while they prayed. In black ink it read, "Sheriff Calloway, resign or die." The letters bled slightly in the rain, but the message was clear. Underneath, a crude signature, Clay Brunner. Amos stared at it for a long time. The wind caught it, tore one corner loose. The paper fluttered like a wounded bird before slapping back against the wood. He reached out and pressed it flat with one rough hand. Somewhere down the street, a piano played out of tune, the saloon again, laughter spilling from its doors. The sound carried on the wind, twisting through the empty alleys like mockery. Amos looked up at the dark sky, eyes burning. "How long, Lord?" he whispered. "How long before a man's silence becomes his sin?" The stars above gave no answer. Only the wind moved, soft, persistent, gathering dust through the sleeping town. And Amos, feeling the weight of that dust, knew it would soon be time to stand again. The wind came first, low and restless, crawling down from the mountains like a living thing. It tugged at doors and shingles, moaned through alleys, and carried with it the scent of rain and reckoning. The sky above Silverton bruised over with black clouds, heavy and trembling, and thunder rolled in the distance, slow, deliberate, like God clearing his throat. Lamps flickered in windows, and every soul that still drew breath knew the night would not pass quietly. Amos Braddock stood by the window of his cabin, watching the storm gather. The glass rattled softly as a gust swept across the plain. His reflection stared back, lines deepened by time, eyes dulled by too much remembering. On the table beside him lay the Colt, oiled and ready, gleaming faintly in the lamplight. For 10 years he had tried to bury it, to bury the man who once drew faster than conscience. But some things refused to stay in the ground. He reached out, his hand steady now, and lifted the revolver. The weight felt right again, as if it had been waiting for him. He slid it into the worn holster hanging from his belt. His duster, old and frayed at the collar, smelled faintly of smoke and rain. He pulled it on, buckled the strap, and adjusted the hat that had shaded him through wars, cattle drives, and heartbreak. Outside, lightning cracked open the sky. He saddled his horse beneath the eaves, rain beginning to fall in hard, slanting sheets. The animal snorted, uneasy, but Amos whispered softly to it, words half prayer, half promise. "Easy boy. It's time we finish what others started." Silverton was near dark when he rode in. The streets shimmered with puddles that reflected the yellow light of scattered lanterns. Doors were barred, curtains drawn tight. The sheriff's office stood empty, its single lamp burning low. He saw a shadow move inside, Deputy Hanks, face pale as paper, peeking through the cracked door. "Braddock," he hissed, voice trembling. "You shouldn't be here. They'll kill you soon as look at you." Amos dismounted, boots splashing in the mud. "You still got a badge, son?" Hanks nodded uncertainly. "Then wear it like it means something." Amos turned and started walking, the wind tugging at his coat. Behind him, the deputy didn't move. The church bell tolled once, sudden and cracked, the sound of iron pain echoing through the storm. It startled crows from the steeple. They rose screaming into the night before the wind swallowed them whole. The saloon at the far end of Main Street glowed red through the rain, firelight spilling across its windows like blood. Music drifted faintly through the door. A piano key struck out of tune, laughter warped by liquor and sin. Amos stopped outside the saloon's swinging doors. He could hear them clearly now, the Brunner gang, their laughter thick and ugly, coins clinking as they counted stolen gold. Clay Brunner's voice rose above the rest, calm and certain, the voice of a man who thought himself untouchable. "Silverton's ours now, boys," Clay said. "Ain't a man left with the guts to say otherwise." The thunder outside answered like an omen. Amos pushed the doors open. The room fell quiet for one suspended heartbeat. Rain hissed on the roof, wind howled through the crack in the windows, and in the middle of it all stood the old cowboy, soaked, hat low, eyes burning beneath the brim. The lamplight made ghosts of the smoke drifting between them. Clay rose slowly from his chair, gold coins spilling from his hand. "Well, I'll be," he drawled. The graveyard spat back its oldest corpse. "You lost, old man?" Amos stepped forward, boots squelching in sawdust and mud. "No. I finally found my way." Jesse laughed from the corner, his hand resting on his pistol. "You ain't got the sand for this, Braddock." Amos's voice came quiet, but every man in that room felt the weight of it. "No, but I've got the truth." The words hung like thunder before the lightning. Clay smirked. "Truth don't stop lead. Sometimes it fires it." And then the storm broke, both inside and out. The first shot cracked through the room, shattering a lantern. Fire spilled across the bar, light flaring wild and orange. The piano chord snapped as a man fell against it, screaming. Amos moved slow, deliberate, each motion precise. His hand was steady as the Colt bucked, 1, 2, 3 times, the reports deafening in the confined air. One outlaw staggered backward, disbelief frozen on his face before collapsing into the smoke. Another tried to draw and didn't finish. Glass exploded, chairs splintered. The smell of gunpowder filled the room, sharp, metallic, final. Jesse lunged from the side, yelling something wordless. Amos turned, fired once, and the young man dropped, his gun clattering harmlessly to the floor. Silence followed, thick as rainwater, broken only by the crackle of the burning bar. Clay stood alone now, eyes wide, chest rising and falling like a cornered animal. For the first time, the grin was gone. "You think this changes anything?" Clay said. "You're just another killer with gray hair." Amos's thumb pulled back the hammer. "Maybe. But I kill for the livin', not for the gold." Clay drew, faster than most men could blink. But Amos didn't flinch. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, something flickered across Amos's mind. For the briefest breath, Clay's face wasn't Clay's. It was Eli's, young, fearless, defiant. The way he'd looked that day on Main Street 10 years ago, before the bullet. The same set of the jaw, the same pride that had cost a life. Amos hesitated, heart breaking anew. His finger trembled on the trigger. The world slowed to the rhythm of his breathing, the fire crackling, the thunder booming overhead, the rain hissing through holes in the roof. Then he saw the truth clear through the smoke. Clay wasn't his son. Clay was the man who'd taken him away. He squeezed the trigger. The shot rang like judgment. Clay stumbled, eyes wide with disbelief, and dropped to his knees. The gold spilled from his pockets, rolling across the floorboards, clinking faintly as they settled. He looked up at Amos one last time, mouth forming words that never found sound, then fell forward into the mud-streaked floor. Outside, the wind screamed through the streets, rattling doors and shutters. The fire dimmed, smoke curling upward in lazy ribbons. Amos stood alone amid the wreckage, the tables overturned, the dead scattered, the storm raging beyond the walls. He holstered the Colt with slow hands, the motion solemn, reverent, like closing a coffin. The thunder rolled again, closer now, shaking the earth. He turned toward the door. The town outside was still, holding its breath. As he stepped through the threshold, rain hit his face cold and clean. It soaked his hat, his coat, his hands, washing away the powder smoke and the blood and the ghosts. Lightning split the sky above him, and for a moment the whole world shone white. He looked up, unblinking. "You got your piece now, boy," he whispered. The wind took his words and carried them down the street, through alleys and over rooftops, until Silverton itself seemed to exhale. Behind him, the saloon's light flickered, guttered, and went dark. Only the storm answered, roaring across the plains as Amos Braddock walked away into the rain, each step fading into legend.